Our futures are often forged in crises. When Primetime came on air for the first time, Europe, the UK and ourselves were in economic chaos. Currencies would mark future political divisions.
The credibility of John Major's economic policy is in ruins tonight. With sterling devalued by 10%, Britain out of the ERM for the foreseeable future, the economic and political consequences will be enormous, and Ireland will not escape the shockwaves.
When sterling fell out of the European exchange rate mechanism, it scarred the UK's bristly relationship with Europe. A generation of Eurosceptics was born. We stayed through the turbulence of devaluations, choosing to stick with Europe rather than our largest trading partner. A stark choice that would return to haunt us.
We, it seems, want to stay within the ERM. How much is it going to hurt us to stay in there?
I think it's going to be dreadful, really, Olivia.
Back then and for a long time afterwards, Europe was often seen through the prism of what was in it for us.
We have secured over £8,000 million over the 7-year period, which represents over £3 million a day for every day for 7 years of non-repayable finance.
As Ireland's economy took off, attitudes changed. Questions over sovereignty, defence, tax and a range of social issues became the focus of the Nice Treaty campaign.
Anyone who criticised the EU was seen as being anti-Europe, been seen as being negative, little, sort of nationalistic. A lot of us felt that, look, Europe is not going in the direction that it should be for a proper democratic functioning society. And there was also an obsession with, well, how much we were going to get out of Europe and how much Europe had given us already.
The result, when it came, was a shock.
The defeat of the Nice Treaty is arguably the most serious setback that this government suffered since it took up office.
Alan Dukes, would you accept that it was smug arrogance on the part of most politicians here that encouraged a lot of voters to vote no?
I think that's a very glib kind of a thing to say.
Well, have you not been listening to them over the past few days?
Yes, I have, and the people who talk about smug arrogance are most of them journalists.
I think there was huge shock and bewilderment because most other member states thought, how is it that people who have benefited so much from the EU are saying no to this project that we all want to go ahead with?
In what was to become a pattern, the people were asked to vote again.
Tonight, the political establishment celebrates its referendum victory. But what lessons will it learn from the Nice saga?
But I do think there's been a high price paid for this victory today, and it has damaged our democratic process.
It showed, in my opinion, the government's attitude towards people's rejection of the EU treaties was utter contempt for the people's decision. If you don't give us the answer we want, we're going to put it back to you. You have to vote again and keep voting till you give us the answer we want.
Meanwhile, the biggest economic decision the country had ever taken had become a reality. We joined the euro.
30 years on from decimalisation and one of Dublin's most famous thoroughfares, Moore Street is yet again preparing for a change in currency. In 2 weeks' time, the new notes and coins will be in our pockets. So how are the preparations going?
Are you worried about it? Are you worried that you might be ripped off? Yeah, of course. Yeah, because I haven't got a clue about it. You know what I mean?
I mean, it was quite a national outrage that our political leaders didn't point out exactly what Ireland was committing itself to, that we were going to be giving up our national currency, we were going to be committing ourselves to an economic situation where our own ministers would have no real control, we couldn't control our interest rates or exchange rates. And I think also the fact that we were going to be joining without the UK, which I think was a major disaster, in my opinion.
Well, hindsight is always great, and you can look back and you can see connections between things that you couldn't see at the time. And the euro is not yet an established currency. I believe it will survive, but it needs more work. It needs to be deeper, it needs more underpinning. But then it fluctuates with crisis, political changes, all the things that we know happen in real life.
While the economy roared, interest in Europe dimmed. But then the economy spluttered. And the electorate was presented with the complexities of the Lisbon Treaty.
The people have spoken. It's no to Lisbon, so what went wrong for the yes side and where does Ireland now stand in Europe?
I remember the morning of the Lisbon count because I had to go down a long corridor to President Barroso's office and knock on his door and tell him that it was not going to come out as he would have hoped.
The solution, of course, was to hold another referendum.
Nothing has changed. The Irish people has the opportunity to decide yes or no.
Enhancing democracy, neutrality,
Competition policy in the treaty.
a militarisation of the European Union.
Participation in Europe.
We're pro-European.
Ask the farmers.
This document, but will be hidden or disguised in some way. This is a constitution that is an anti-democratic formula that robs Europe of its democratic soul.
You keep quoting failed politicians, and you're another failed politician yourself. Why should anybody believe you?
Okay, stop the insults.
I'm not being an insult.
Look, stop talking.
This is about legally binding guarantees.
With a guaranteed commissioner in the bag and concerns over our corporate tax rate allayed for the time being, Lisbon was passed second time around. But Europe was about to become an even bigger and much more controversial part of our lives.
Commissioner Olli Rehn comes here, but as a good friend.
That's the best way of Europe supporting Ireland, and that's why I'm here.
Today is, by any standards, one of the blackest days in the history of this state, as the world watches the IMF arrive to effectively take control of our economic affairs.
The crash changed how we thought about Europe and how Europe thought about us.
I remember when it started, sitting in President Barroso's office one Saturday morning, and he leaned back in his chair and he said, "Are you telling me that 60 billion isn't going to be enough?"
The problems of Ireland were created by irresponsible financial behaviour of some Irish institutions and by the lack of supervision in the Irish market.
You have to think back to the kind of fever pitch of the time. Greece had collapsed. Ireland was next. Portugal followed. So there was a terrible fear that the whole project was about to unravel.
Europe was now in a full-blown debt crisis, threatening the very survival of the euro. Ireland was in the eye of the storm. It would take many more crisis meetings and a deluge of cash from the European Central Bank to save the euro. And yes, another European referendum. The so-called fiscal compact was seen by some as another transfer of sovereignty.
Don't write austerity into the Constitution.
Yes to stability. Yes to investment. Yes to recovery. Yes to a working Ireland.
Ireland represents only 1% of the whole of Europe. We're small, we're little frogs in a big pudding.
But in a post-crash Ireland, it was more about survival than sovereignty. The referendum was comfortably passed.
It means that we're going to be a helpless and basically state on the periphery of Europe without any real control over our own destiny, our own economy, our own infrastructure, our own industry, any of those things, and without any legitimate democratic control.
Reduction of sovereignty compared to what? I don't think any country is, well, North Korea maybe is sovereign, but who wants to be North Korea? There is no other country I can think of that is completely sovereign. Big leaps in European integration that people tend to look at, they are coming, and they will only come in future from crisis. Because it's only when the chips are down that people are willing to make brave decisions.
Then, once again, a political earthquake in Britain turned the tables on where we stand in Europe.
We fought 2 wars for independence, and now we're just joining up with the ones we were fighting against. And they're telling us what to do again, and I don't like it.
Before we joined the common market, we survived. So why shouldn't we survive again?
I'm going to vote Remain. I think we're better off in the EU.
Our relationship with Europe has changed just as well, because now there's no room for any illusions about what it means for Ireland to be in Europe. Brexit has brought that choice once more into sharp focus.
Brexit has forced us once again to confront the implications of the decisions we've made over the past 25 years to move closer to Europe, while our nearest neighbour turns conclusively in the opposite direction.